بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وبعد. First of all, do you remember, anyone remember where we left off last time? And we were talking about one of the, or some of the laws that we need sometimes for tafsir, that we could almost call a source of tafsir, but that may not be the correct way of calling it, is the practice, some of the practices of the Arabs during the time of Jahiliyyah. Because there's many verses in the Qur'an which refer to things that the Arabs used to do during the time of Jahiliyyah. Without having an understanding of those customs, those things that occurred, we will not understand the verses completely. Well, last time we gave one example. What was that example? Nobody recall the example except for the people who are here. What was the example? No? Hey. I remember you gave it an example. Well, the example we gave last time was about after the Hajj. You have some understanding of that. And it was the practice of the Arabs that they thought it was a matter of taqwa, that they would, after the Hajj, they would enter their houses from the back, not enter them from the front. The first verse we'll discuss today also is related to this. What did you do? Now we're ready. Read this verse.
من خفتم ألا تقسطوا في اليتامى فانكحوا ما طاب لكم من النساء مثنى وثلاث ورباع فإن خفتم ألا تعدلوا فواحدة أو ما ملكت أيمانكم ذلك أدنى ألا تعلموا.
طيب, this verse from Surah An-Nisa, the third verse, let me read the meaning in English. But if you fear that you shall not deal justly with the female orphan wards under your care, then do not marry them, but marry other women whom you like, up to 2 or 3 or 4. And if you shall fear that you shall not act equitably, then marry only one, or from the female captives under your charge. What's the relationship between marrying orphans? And what's the relationship in this verse between marrying orphans and marrying other free women? It says that if you fear that you'll not be able to do justice to the orphans, then marry free women. What is it talking about? What's the verse referring to?
بسبب النزول عادات الجاهلية يحبون يربي البنت يتزوج.
ايوه. يعني actually this was the question that was put to Aisha, the wife of the Prophet. She was asked why there's a reference actually to orphans in this verse by one of the tabi'in, her nephew. Well, she said it was the practice, it was in reference to the practice of those people who would put pressure on the relatives of the orphans under their care, as they wanted to marry them in order to gain their property, and in order to gain the property of the orphan. Well, this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and after they became Muslim, and they were familiar with this custom, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it's okay, it's allowed to marry orphans, but if you fear that you will not do just to them, those orphans in your care, then marry whom you like of the free women, 2 or 3 or 4. This is the part that Surah Al-Mujadila. What's Surah Al-Mujadila about? Dihar. What is Dihar?
When you say that's your wife is like your mother.
To say that any part of your wife is similar to your mother. And where did this practice come from? It came from the time of Jahiliyyah. It was considered one of the harshest forms of divorce. That if you said that to your wife, that she's like if she's like your mother in any way to you, then this was a final and complete divorce, and the two could never remarry again. And actually, here's the meaning of the verse is clear from the Asbab al-Nuzul, also the practice of the people of Jahiliyyah, because actually it happened during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that one Sahabi said that to his wife, that you are like my mother's back, and then they brought it to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Well, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his first answer to them was what? His first answer to them was in accordance with the practice of the people of Jahiliyyah. In fact, in general, in Islamic law, unless there was some change in the practice of Jahiliyyah, and there was quite a few changes in the practice of Jahiliyyah, otherwise the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would follow the practice. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told her that you are forbidden for him, and as was the custom of practice of Jahiliyyah. And then this verse was revealed, giving the actual meaning of giving the Islamic ruling concerning that. طيب. And one verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 228, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the divorced women, that they shall they have to wait for their iddah for 3 monthly courses, or 3 quru, and it is not allowed for them that they should conceal what Allah has created in their wombs, if they're believers in Allah. Okay. ولا يحل لهن أن يكتم ما خلق الله في أرحمهن إن كن يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر. طيب. يعني this phrase in this verse, does this phrase bring up any question in your mind?
As if it was the case before.
Like, what's it referring to? So what is it? This verse is saying that the woman who is being divorced, she should not hide what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. She should not hide, for example, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created in her womb. Okay. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically points that out. Is there any reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically points that out? Or when you read this verse, does it ever come to your mind to ask why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning that in particular? So did you ever research it and find out what was it? Since you said yes.
قلت على شكل الزواج إذا مثلا طلقها وبقيت قد تكون حامل فلا تبين.
ايوه
لا كان يجوز طلاق الحامل الجاهلية.
Still. What used to happen during the time of Jahiliyyah, and why that is mentioned explicitly in the verse, is because during the time of Jahiliyyah, if a woman was divorced and she was in her iddah, it was the right of the first husband to take her back at any time during the iddah. This is actually the same in Islam. Okay? Until she gives birth. But what they used to do in the time of Jahiliyyah, what was common, was if the woman didn't want that man to come back to her, then she would hide the fact that she's pregnant in order to marry someone else as soon as she could. So after 3 months, she'll just claim that she's finished, and she will marry somebody else, even though during those 3 months she didn't have any period and so forth. So it was a common practice in the time of Jahiliyyah for the women to do so. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically mentions it in that verse.
حتى الآن يمكن امرأة مسلمة تعمل هذا الشيء ما تبين تعمل تخاطر.
She could do it, but she'll be committing a sin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically mentions it, that if she believes in Allah on the last day, she will not do it. There are also all the verses about Zayd from Surah Al-Ahzab, the verses which are related to Zayd, that we know during the time of Jahiliyyah, Zayd was called what? He was known as Zayd ibn Muhammad. And because in the time of Jahiliyyah, when you adopt someone, then that person becomes like your actual son. So Zayd was known as Zayd ibn Muhammad. The adoption during the time of Jahiliyyah, and they have the same thing in this Jahiliyyah here. Well, the verses about Zayd that talk about the fact that and you should call them by their real names, and you're not actually their father, or they're not actually your sons. All of these verses are again referring to a practice that occurred during the time of Jahiliyyah. Or without being familiar with that background, you will not be able to understand the verse again completely. Even the verse that Faisal read today in Salat al-Maghrib. What was the first surah that you read? If you remember, if you were paying attention. What was the first surah that you read? Even this short surah, it refers to many things about the Quraysh that if you're not familiar, if you don't have any familiarity with what was happening and what was going on at that time, you will not be able to understand completely or appreciate all the meanings that this verse contains. Who were the Quraysh? Where were they living? How did they survive? How come their place was a place of safety? And all of these things we know, or we understand better, because we know the history of the Quraysh. We know that Mecca was made a sanctuary even among the Arabs and Jahiliyyah and so forth. So one of the sources of tafsir, one thing that we should be familiar with in order to make sure that we make a proper tafsir and we understand the verses of the Qur'an properly, is by knowing the customs of the people of Jahiliyyah, and the actions or the history of that time and what they used to do, as the Qur'an, as I said, makes many references to it. Another example, and another area or another branch of knowledge that we should also be familiar with, which is very close to that, you could almost consider it a subdivision of the thing that we just finished talking about, is knowing the customs and the beliefs of the Jews and the Christians at the time of the Prophet Muhammad also. Because the Qur'an in many occasions refers to things that the Jews and the Christians, especially the Jews, used to do. What they used to do, for example, in Medina and some of their practices. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers specifically to them. And in order, as I said, and we can get the meaning of the verse in general, but to have a real good understanding of what the verse is talking about and to really appreciate what the verse is referring to, we should have this knowledge in order to understand in more detail the real meaning of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to. Now here's a verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and I'm sure you all know the meaning of it and what it's referring to, but it falls as an example here, so we will do it. I mean, it's related to this topic. Well, I'll have Faisal again read verse 89. This time raise your voice so everyone can. I can read quietly to myself and no one can hear me. That's not the purpose of having you read.
ولما جاءهم كتاب من عند الله مصدق لما معهم وكانوا من قبل يستفتحون على الذين كفروا فلما جاءهم ما عرفوا كفروا به فلعنة الله على الكافرين.
Wait, this verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, the meaning could be, and when there comes unto them a scripture from Allah confirming that in their possession, though before that they were asking for a signal triumph over those who disbelieved, and when there comes unto them that which they know to be the truth, they disbelieve therein. The curse of Allah is on the disbelievers. Now the translation I read is the translation, one of the English translations available. What's the meaning in this verse? This is a verse referring to what the people of the book used to do, in particular the Jews. What's the meaning in this verse about من قبل يستفتحون على الذين كفروا? What's the meaning of that phrase? As I said, I'm sure it's one that you're all familiar with. وكان من قبل يستفتحون على الذين كفروا فلما جاءهم ما عرفوا كفروا به فلعنة الله على الكافرين. Before that time they used to يستفتحون على الذين كفروا. What's the meaning of that? No, you're wrong, obviously. That's why I'm not responding to you. You're not familiar with it? Because there's a famous fabricated hadith related to this verse, so that's why I thought you would all know what it's talking about. The fabricated verse Okay, I mean the fabricated hadith, which is related to this, which I thought maybe some of you are familiar with, is that in some of the books of Tafseer you'll find that when the Jews, I believe the Jews and some Arabs were fighting, the Jews used to cry out the name of Muhammad, Muhammad, and this was before the coming of Muhammad, saying that when Muhammad comes we will defeat you. As I said, that hadith is not an authentic hadith, but what the verse is actually referring to is something close to that, not exactly, but it's referring to the people of the Jews of Medina. The Jews of the Medina used to always tell the Arabs of Medina that there will soon come a prophet, and when that prophet comes, the Jews would triumph over the disbelievers and they would regain their lost glory. So when the Prophet ﷺ finally came, they used to tell this to the Ansar, the people of Medina. So when the Prophet ﷺ finally came, the people of Medina recognized that that's the Prophet that they kept talking about, and they believed in them. And the Jews, as the verse describes, disbelieved in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, although they knew that is the truth that was to come. So that's an example of a verse that's referring to a practice of the people of the book Ahl al-Kitab from the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. In order to understand how would you understand the verse otherwise?
Same thing. We didn't know how to explain.
I don't think so. طيب.
ايش الواضح من المثال يعني ايش معنى يستفتحون؟ ما تقدر تجيب ثاني يوم مقابل الناس يستفتحون؟
In English? And they used to claim that they would have fath over the kuffar when the Prophet was coming. Then when the Prophet came, that they knew, they disbelieved him. That's what the verse is referring to. Yeah, that story about the two were groups were fighting and they claimed they called Muhammad and they got victory. This is not true, but you'll find it in some books of Tafseer. This is not a true hadith. But what it's actually referring to, as I said, is the Jews at the time of before the coming of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in Medina. They used to tell the Arabs that when the Prophet comes, they would be successful over the Arabs, the disbelievers. Those are basically the sources of tafsir. Obviously they have different strengths and different weights. We've discussed so far the Qur'an, the Sunnah, the statements of the Sahaba, the statements of the Tabi'een, Arabic language. How many is this? 5? Is that 5? How many more? Asbab al-Nuzul, customs of the time of the people of Jahiliyyah. Yeah, Arabic language you mentioned that. And the one we just finished, the customs or the actions of the people. Yeah, we finished them all. But there's one more source of tafsir. What's that source?
Isra'iliyat.
No, Isra'iliyat. It's not a source of tafsir, I will not say. We'll discuss that in a future series, a different source.
Some hints.
Give you some hints. It's different in nature from all of these. What's one thing that's common among all of these that we've discussed so far? I could be wrong. No, what's one thing that's common among all of these that we've discussed so far?
Place.
Narration.
The mosque, building Islam syllables.
No, الجزيرة العربية. No, كل شيء took place in الجزيرة العربية.
طيب, okay. What's another thing common among these?
There comes from narration.
طيب. All of them are naql. All of them are based on something reported. Arabic language, and you don't make up your own Arabic language. You have to follow what has been reported according to Arabic language, the Qur'an, Sunnah, and so forth. The history of the people of Arabia before Islam and so forth. They're all naql. They're all based on things that are reported. And so therefore, by the way, in case I haven't mentioned before, obviously all of these we have to make sure that the transmission or the report that we receive is an authentic report. I think I made that point later, but let me just mention it again now. Right. So that's all the sources that we discussed before. As I said, the other source differs on this point from all those sources. So what could it be? So if it's not naqli, it must be aqli, meaning it's not something based on reports, but it is something based on our own intellect and what we can conclude from things. What do you call that? What should it be called?
Rational thinking?
لا, in Arabic. Ijtihad. Okay. The next source of tafsir, if we can call it the source of tafsir, is ijtihad.
لا تقول 11 مصدر 11
لا ممكن.
عندنا 10
لا ممكن. طيب الحمد لله. You have 10?
عندك 10
Added 2 more.
Yeah, great. And even this one lecture he has 10. طيب والله والله ما أدري. لا 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 لا. Arabic language took about 3. أسباب النزول took 2. طيب, the sources of tafsir that we have been discussing so far, I said they are based on naql, they are relatively fixed. When it comes to weight, they are given a strong weight, and sometimes they are even unquestionable. And what they say is final. You cannot debate with it, or you cannot argue that there might be some other meaning. Basically what these sources that we talked about so far give us is that they give us the essential meanings of the verses of the Qur'an itself. In other words, what does the verse itself mean? We get that from the sources that we discussed, either from other verses in the Qur'an or from hadith or Arabic language and so forth. Now, how to take those meanings of the Qur'an and how to apply them in our daily lives and things that come up nowadays, and how to take those meanings and give it, so to speak, a living form in light of what we are experiencing today or what we face today. This is also the job of the mufassir, the one who comments on the Qur'an. And in order for him to do that, he has to make ijtihad. He has to take the meaning of the Qur'an and apply it to what is happening today and so forth. So what we've been discussing so far, the sources of tafsir that we've been discussing so far, they don't mean to imply. In the first lecture that we gave about the danger of speaking about the Qur'an or making tafsir without basing it on knowledge and so forth, they don't mean to imply that there's no such thing as ijtihad when it comes to tafsir. This isn't what we've been implying. And in fact, since the Qur'an is the guide for the Muslims for all time until the Day of Judgment, it is necessary that ijtihad is performed with respect to the tafsir, because this means in each generation, in each era that the Muslims live, the Qur'an claims to give guidance for that era. Okay, so new things come up and so forth, as we'll talk about. We'll give some examples later. New things come up, and the guidance of the Qur'an related to those new things is there. The guidance is there, and it is up to the scholar of the Qur'an to take the teachings of the Qur'an and to apply it to what is happening in his time. So the sources of the tafsir that we talked about so far, as I said, basically they give us the meaning of the Qur'an. And as I said, some of them are unrefutable. And once they are stated, for example, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ telling us the meaning of a verse, or the asbab al-nuzul, giving us the exact meaning of a phrase in the Qur'an or so forth, and these things are unquestionable, cannot be touched. But the role, as I said, is to take those meanings and figure out how to apply them in our current time. Well, if anyone makes ijtihad, in other words, if anyone tries to interpret the Qur'an in such a way that it contradicts some of those sources that we mentioned, for example, contradicts the Qur'an itself, or contradicts hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, or contradicts the asbab al-nuzul, therefore what? Obviously, that tafsir, that explanation that is given, or that ijtihad that is making, contradicts confirmed sources, and so therefore it must be rejected. So obviously this, what we call source of tafsir, or ijtihad, in weight or in strength that comes after the other sources that we've discussed so far. Please. If you remember the first lecture that we gave in this series, it was actually Ramadan. We started this series, I think, in Ramadan. Now it's Muharram. So if you can remember the first lecture we gave in this series, we talked about the danger or the prohibition actually of speaking about the Qur'an according to one's opinion. Right? We gave many quotes from Sahaba and Tabi'een and so forth that demonstrated that it's not allowed to speak about the Qur'an according to one's opinion. But now we're saying that ijtihad is a source of tafsir. Is there any contradiction between those two?
No contradiction.
Is there a difference between ra'i and ijtihad?
Well, big difference.
Is that right?
Yeah, because the ra'i is based on rational thinking. And the ijtihad
Based on irrational thinking?
No, rational thinking.
No, ijtihad is...
No. Ijtihad basically, in order to be mujtahid, first of all you have to know like all the branches of tafsir. The knowledge of it. You use ra'i, only aql. There's no knowledge about tafsir.
Okay, the scholars of Kufa, like Abu Hanifa and others, they were known as ashab al-ra'i. Does that mean that they used to just make fiqh without any source or any basis?
No. I forgot. The meaning is different here. I know, this used to be called house ra'i.
No.
You can forget them.
So ra'i by itself doesn't necessarily mean that you're giving an opinion without any basis for it. But it could mean that. Okay, so ra'i is kind of a more general term. Ijtihad, we would hope, is more specific, although ijtihad also can be sometimes not based on anything. But if you go to the books on tafsir, there's a difference of opinion about whether or not it is allowed to make tafsir bi-ra'i or bil-ijtihad, or to make tafsir according to one's opinion. There's a difference of opinion. Some scholars say that it is not allowed. Tafsir bi-ra'i is not allowed. Okay, if you go especially to some of the early scholars, they'll say that making tafsir by ijtihad, let's call it by ijtihad in English, tafsir bi-ra'i in Arabic. Only because I don't like the phrase making tafsir by your own opinion. I don't like that phrase. Right? You go to... Yeah. غير نقلي. How about that? عقلي. اجتهادي. Ijtihad also عقلي. Yeah. That's why I said the ra'i is more general than ijtihad. Inshallah. We'll see. When we conclude, we'll see how they're different, I hope. One of the, let's look at their proofs then for saying that ijtihad bi-ra'i is not allowed. Tafsir bi-ra'i is not allowed. Or making tafsir on the basis of your own thinking, your own reasoning, your own opinion is not allowed. Number one, they said that making tafsir bi-ra'i, or ijtihad and tafsir based on your own thinking and so forth, is the same thing as speaking about Allah without knowledge. Right? And as a corollary to that, they say that making tafsir bi-ra'i, when you make tafsir bi-ra'i or ijtihad, you can never have yaqeen, or you can never have certainty. It is something dhanni or something speculative. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blamed those people, or in the Qur'an Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blames the people who follow dhann or speculative things instead of yaqeen things. طيب. Is that a good argument? This is their first argument. I have three here. First of all, they are saying that tafsir bi-ra'i or bil-ijtihad is speaking about Allah without ilm. Okay, so you're saying that if your ijtihad is based on ilm, is not speaking without ilm. Okay. What about their second point though? They said it is not yaqini, it is dhanni. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Qur'an blames those people who follow dhann. Well, those of you who had the usul fiqh class should be able to refute this instantly. And those of you who dropped out early from the usul fiqh class, you are excused from. What's the meaning of dhann? Well, dhann is something. Do you have it in Indonesian? Dhann, something speculative. It's not. You don't have a strong proof for it. It's not something certain, as opposed to yaqeen. Yaqeen is something you have strong proof for it. There's no question about it. Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many verses in the Quran blames those people who just follow them. For example, talks about some of the kuffar that they are just following them. Okay.
How today talking about this?
So what's your answer to that?
يعني ما يسوي الظن لأنه بعد ما يسوي الاجتهاد يصير يقين
صحيح؟
الاجتهاد نعم المصدر الرابع المصدر الأول القرآن والسنة ثم الاجتهاد ثم الاجتهاد ثم القيام.
ايش؟
الإجماع.
وش مذهب
الإجماع؟
أحمد الزاهد.
أحمد مذهب؟
المصادر الأربعة.
الأحمدي. وش الحنبلي؟
قرآن وسنة وإجماع وقياس.
أنت شافعي. شافعي نعم. نفس الحنبلي.
طيب الظن لما تجتهد يعني إذا يعني بحثت المسألة مثلا وطلعت المصادر هذا واجتهدت هذا ما يعتبر من الظن الله قال الله ذم.
صحيح.
نعم.
صحيح.
أصبح يقين عندي.
صحيح يا مصطفى.
يعني بدلت وسعت.
هذا الظن من يقين.
طيب. Then is at different levels. Then, as Mustafa said, it can even reach the level of yaqeen. And in fact, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word dhan meaning yaqeen in many cases. Like in Surah Al-Baqarah. So dhan is at different levels. It can reach the level of certainty. There's also something known as dhan al-rajih wa dhan al-marjuh. And the dhan which, if you put together your evidence, okay, the evidence shows that this opinion is right. The preponderance of the evidence, as they would say in the courts here, shows you that this opinion is right. This is called the weighty dhan or the strong dhan. This is not the kind of thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about a dhan al-marjuh, or the dhan that has no proof for it, or that is contradicted by strong proof. So when people make tafseer, when they make ijtihad in tafseer, and it is based on, for example, the sources we mentioned, then that is not the kind of dhan that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about. So therefore, this opinion, or this argument concerning tafseer bi-ra'i is not the strong argument. And their argument is faulty.
You're saying that they're refuting it, how to write this?
Their argument is making tafseer bi-ra'i is the same as speaking without knowledge, and it is the same thing as following dhan. This is not true.
I mean, it's better to state all the arguments and refute them.
Yeah, because I've noticed that people have a short memory span. If I state all their arguments, they'll forget what was the first argument when we go back to refute it. So we take one at a time. The next argument is Surah Al-Nahl, verse 44, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنِ النَّاسِ مَا نُزِلَ إِلَيْهِمْ, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we have revealed to you, to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the dhikr in order for him to explain unto mankind what has been revealed for them. Okay, what is their argument from this verse? Now remember, they're trying to prove that tafseer bi-ra'i is not allowed. Based on this verse, what is their argument? This is one of the verses they quote.
The Prophet Muhammad explained everything, so we don't need it.
So it's the role of the Prophet ﷺ to explain the Quran, and there's no room left for us to explain it after he's done. Is that a good argument?
التفسير
رسمنا مطلوب كلمة كلمة تفسير كل كلمة في القرآن لكن إجمالا يفسر تفسير مجمل.
طيب, did we discuss earlier about how much the Prophet ﷺ explained of the Quran? What did we conclude in that lecture?
يقول هذا الشيء تفسير مجمل يفسر رسمنا مطلوب إنه يفسر كلمة كلمة أو شيء نص آية في القرآن ولكن ذيك المعنى الظاهر من شيء تفهم المعنى الظاهر.
طيب, the Prophet ﷺ died and he did not actually explain the whole Quran or every word of the Quran. In fact, he didn't need to. Especially during his time, many of the verses of the Quran, the meaning was very clear to the people who lived at that time. So in fact, the Prophet ﷺ did not explain every word of the Quran, but he explained and implemented the Quran in general. Well, that verse, by the way, that I read, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتَبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. How does it end? وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one way of reading it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the dhikr to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for him to explain unto mankind what was revealed for them. وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. What's the meaning of وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ at the end of that verse? And that so perchance they may ponder, if you want to, or that happily they may reflect, as it's been translated. How do you understand that at the end of that verse? There's some hikmah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing here. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in order for him to explain it and
think.
Who think?
Believers.
In order for the believers to think about what?
Think about
also to and also to ponder over the Quran itself, as you find in other places in the Quran. Well, some people use this last part of the verse also to refute the argument. It's not necessary, but some people use that also, showing that even in that verse itself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing to the fact that the believers must ponder over the Quran.
So if it تفكرون here, what you said, ponder over, تفكرون فيه. If Allah says that the Prophet will explain the reminder or the dhikr, does it mean that you will think more about it?
Doesn't say that the Prophet will explain every single thing. Doesn't say that.
Yeah, but لعلهم تفكرون.
What does it mean?
But it doesn't seem that that they think about it.
As I said, actually it's not needed. It's not needed, but some people mention that as an argument too. The third argument, or the third proof that it's not allowed to make tafsir bi-ra'i, are the hadith that we talked about in the first lecture, about whoever interprets the Quran according to his ra'i, he should take his seat in the hellfire, and whoever interprets the Quran according to his opinion, even if he is correct, he is wrong. Any response to that?
The ra'i is different. The opinion is different from the one we're talking about.
Ra'i which contradicts
They're like hawa.
So what's an even better refutation of this?
This authentic hadith?
We said that those hadith are not authentic hadith. They are not authentic hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. They are weak hadith. But most likely they are statements of the Sahaba, like Ibn Abbas. So if they're statements of the Sahaba, they could use them as arguments. So how do you respond to that?
The meaning of ra'i.
Okay, what
desires?
So how can you prove what they mean by ra'i in this statement? And in order to make that claim, you have to offer some proof, right? So they're saying that the Sahaba said you cannot make ra'i, you cannot use your own opinion to make tafsir. And they quote these statements. And whoever interprets the Quran according to his opinion shall take a seat in the hellfire. You're saying that ra'i here means a specific kind of ra'i. What's your proof for that?
It's not the case of Sahaba would abuse it.
If it were the case?
It's not the case. It doesn't mean desires. Then why did you say it in the first place? The wife Why did Sahaba say it and mention having this aspect?
I didn't follow your argument. There's a good refutation of this argument.
طيب this right contradicts يعني.
Yeah,
clear proof.
but what's the proof that this is the ra'i that they mean here? Opinion, as we said, is more general than that.
Because there's no other way, and if you don't have proofs about some of this, that you explain it.
The strongest argument that is that even those Sahaba themselves, we can go to their statements about the Qur'an, and we can see that they themselves used ra'i sometimes and made ijtihad when it came to tafsir. So this is proof that what they mean by ra'i is a specific kind of opinion, a specific kind of reasoning. It's not just using opinion or using your mind in general. For example, earlier we quoted Abu Bakr, the first Khalifa, making his famous statement. What is his famous statement? About speaking. Abu Bakr himself, he said that what sky would shade me, or what earth would, let's say, give me a place to live, if I should speak about the Qur'an without knowledge. The same Abu Bakr, when he was asked about al-kilala, what is al-kilala? It doesn't matter. Here's what he said. He said, I am.
It's about something haram. It's like say cows.
No, Miraz. She doesn't have.
You're thinking of something else.
She doesn't have father.
Are you thinking of Jallala?
Very similar. Very similar.
What did Abu Bakr say? He said, I am speaking about it according to my opinion. If I am correct, it is from Allah. If it is otherwise, it is from me and the shaitan. The kilala is the one. Right? So this means that when the Sahaba, and we can take other examples from Umar ibn Khattab or Ibn Abbas, the same people we quoted earlier as saying that it's not allowed to use ra'i. This means that they're talking about a specific kind of ra'i, or a specific kind of using opinion. And those are basically, if you look in the books of concerning the science of tafsir, those are the only proofs that they will give that it is not allowed to make ijtihad in tafsir or tafsir bi ra'i, is not allowed. Now, as for those who say that tafsir bi ra'i or making ijtihad or using your mind and your intellect in making tafsir is allowed, they also have lots of proof themselves. One of their proofs is that the Qur'an itself points to the obligation of using your ra'i in understanding the Qur'an, using or making ijtihad in understanding the Qur'an. The Qur'an itself points to it. What's their argument there? What is it?
سورة المائدة.
أيوه.
وما قتل منكم متعمدا.
لا, that's a different. That's في التطبيق. This is a refutation of the Zahiri. It's a different topic. طيب. How about those verses in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about تدبر أفلا يتدبرون القرآن, and do they not ponder over the Qur'an? What's the meaning of this verse? أفلا يتدبرون القرآن.
يفكرون في معناه.
Are you sure?
تدبر شيء تدحر.
How you can apply it?
Yeah.
How can you understand it to apply it?
Good. So the verse itself is saying what? It's saying that people should ponder over the meanings of the Qur'an. If all the meanings of the Qur'an were given to us, and there's no room for ijtihad, there's no room for using our intellect in understanding the Qur'an, what would be the meaning of this verse? So this verse is pointing to the fact that there's some room for pondering over the Qur'an and understanding the Qur'an. By the way, what's the meaning of, specifically, what's the meaning of tadabbur? very specific.
بمعنى التعقل أفلا يتدبرون حين بمعنى أفلا يعقلون.
So what's the root, or what is the word تدبر come from?
دبر.
Hey, what's the meaning of دبر?
يعني عد وهيئ. دبر يعني how to explain it? You know what دبر. You find something.
It refers to actually the final thing, the last thing. Sometimes. Yani the root, it refers to the last thing. The last thing you can think of, the last thing you can find. One modern writer, and commenting on this verse, he says that أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, it points out that the one who reads the Qur'an, the true believer, should ponder over the verses of the Qur'an and should use his intellect and thought, and he should note the final or the foremost meanings of its words, its hidden, its minute meanings, its detailed meanings, its beautiful aspects that the normal person does not notice. And in other words, the believer should go beyond just the general meaning of the Qur'an that everyone should notice, but he should try to ponder over the Qur'an and see really what is the meaning of the verses of the Qur'an. As I said, obviously, if it were the case that all of the meanings of the Qur'an were already given to us, and through naql, then this verse itself would have no meaning. So, if tafsir be ra'i, or if making ijtihad in tafsir, this is the second argument. If tafsir bi ra'i is not allowed, then in fact ijtihad itself should not be allowed. And because when you make ijtihad in tafsir, usually you are trying to figure out how the Qur'an is to be applied nowadays. Was there anybody nowadays who says that the door to ijtihad is closed?
Some people do.
Still some people say that? Like, it used to be a popular expression, but I think most people realize that it is not a correct expression. And the door to ijtihad will always remain open as such, and that also refers to ijtihad when it comes to tafsir of the Qur'an. Thirdly, they also argue that there was lots of difference of opinion among the Sahaba, not lots of difference of opinion, but there was some difference of opinion among the Sahaba regarding the meanings of different verses in the Qur'an. Obviously, if everything was naqli, everything was simply transmitted and there was no room for thinking about the meaning of the Qur'an, then there should not have been all these differences of opinion among the Sahaba. It was a proof that they were using their opinion, there was a proof that they were making ijtihad, and because of their ijtihad and the different levels of understanding and so forth, they had different opinions in the tafsir of different verses. And their fourth argument is the dua that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made for Ibn Abbas. What is the dua that I'm referring to? طيب. The Prophet ﷺ made dua for Ibn Abbas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give him the understanding of the religion and also teach him or give him the knowledge of ta'wil. Ta'wil meaning what? Okay, the understanding of the Qur'an. I think the Suyuti wrote that if ta'wil here or just what is related and heard, and in other words just from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, like tanzil, then there would be no benefit for choosing Ibn Abbas for this supplication. But this point that the Prophet ﷺ made dua for Ibn Abbas for something other than simply what is narrated and what is transmitted. And that other thing is tafsir, what was later known as tafsir bi ra'i or ijtihad. And there's no question about this, or there's no doubt about this statement. So which group is correct? The group that says that there's no such thing as ijtihad and tafsir, or the group that says that there is such thing as ijtihad and tafsir?
The question is no answer yes or no would be satisfactory. Between
what do you mean by
you graduate?
What do you mean by ijtihad and tafsir? What do you mean by ijtihad and tafsir?
Let me explain it. Ra'i and tafsir.
يعني give examples to be clear. يعني مثل قول ابن عباس عن الغناء أن له الحديث أن له الحديث هو
لا ابن مسعود. أيوه.
يعني إذا كان اجتهاد.
No. What do you think?
تفسير حديث القرآن.
For us, it's not tafsir bil-ijtihad. We quote Ibn Abbas, Ibn Mas'ud is saying that. But what about from Ibn Mas'ud himself? Was that ijtihad?
I don't know whether he heard from Prophet Muhammad or made ijtihad.
No, I don't think he heard it from the Prophet Muhammad.
So, I mean,
this is based on the Arabic language. No, the hadith includes music and singing.
طيب, I mean, give us examples.
You just gave us one.
Oh, is this one an example?
Hey.
طيب.
Another one?
بعض العلماء يقولون يجوز التفسير بالرأي ولكن لا بد من الدليل.
Right. The problem is that each group somehow went to an extreme. One group said that there's no such thing as tafsir bil-ra'i, and another group, in some cases, they went to the point that everyone is free, for example, to make tafsir. Well, actually, so therefore, both the opinions have some kind of shortcomings to it. It's true that there is such thing as ijtihad or tafsir bil-ra'i, but that doesn't mean that every tafsir bil-ra'i is correct or is acceptable. So the tafsir bil-ra'i, or the tafsir using one's thought and using one's intellect and so forth, and making ijtihad and tafsir, that tafsir which is based on those sources of tafsir that we talked about, the Qur'an, hadith and so forth, it's based on those, and from those it derives the meaning of the Qur'an or how the Qur'an is to be applied. That kind of tafsir is acceptable. And it was known as the tafsir bil-ra'i al-mamduh, and it's permissible or the praiseworthy tafsir bil-ra'i. The other kind of tafsir bil-ra'i, the other kind of ijtihad in making tafsir, is where the person makes ijtihad without taking into consideration the sources of tafsir, and without making sure that he doesn't contradict the sources of tafsir and what the meanings that the sources of tafsir give. This kind of tafsir bil-ra'i is not acceptable, and it became known as the tafsir ra'i al-madmoon, or the blameworthy tafsir bil-ra'i. In fact, if you look, the scholars if you study the history of tafsir, they usually divide tafsir into different categories. They divide into, for example, tafsir which is based on reports. It's bil-ma'thur, and based on reports such as hadith of the Prophet, statements of the Sahaba, statements of the Tabi'in, and so forth. That is usually included in that category of tafsir, books of tafsir. What famous tafsir are usually included in that category? Tafsir according to reported tradition, hadith, they usually divide tafsir into three categories. Tafsir bil-ma'thur, or based on reported narration. Tafsir according to opinion, which is okay, acceptable, praiseworthy. And tafsir according to opinion, which is not acceptable. This is usually how they divide. The first category includes tafsir of Ibn Kathir. What else? Did he write tafsir? I don't know. Qurtubi? No. Qurtubi is in the middle category. The Tabari. Okay, in tafsirs like that. If you read these tafsirs like a Tabari or Ibn Kathir, you'll see that they also have lots of ijtihad. There's no tafsir that doesn't have ijtihad in it, except for one that I know of. I mean, historically, there's only been one tafsir where there's no ijtihad. But for example, the tafsir al-Tabari, many times he gives his opinion based on Arabic language and so forth about what's the strongest opinion or strongest statement about such and such verse. Ibn Kathir also, many times he mentions things which are not completely based on reported narration. Ibn Kathir, for example, in his tafsir, he talks about al-Yasiq. What is al-Yasiq? Yeah. Al-Yasiq. I think that's, if I remember correctly. This is
It's a book.
the book. Which book? So the Yasiq is the book of laws that the Mongols used to have and used to apply. It's made up of Mongol traditions and some things that they took from Hindus, some things that they took from Muslims, some things that they took from Christians and Jews. This was their book of law that they used to apply. And they claimed to be Muslims, but they applied this book of law. So Ibn Kathir in his Tafseer, he talks about the Yasiq. And he said anyone who believes in it and applies it instead of the Qur'an, he is kafir. He is making hukm بغير ما أنزل الله. And obviously his discussion about the Yasiq and applying it to this verse in the Qur'an, discussing it under these verses in the Qur'an, this is kind of ijtihad on his own part. Obviously the Prophet ﷺ didn't discuss it, the Sahaba, the Tabi'in didn't discuss it. So in actually every book there's no such thing as Tafsir bil-Ma'thur that doesn't have ijtihad. And similarly the ijtihad which is acceptable, and almost all of those books of ijtihad which are acceptable also, they contain lots of hadith and so forth. So historically actually almost all of the scholars of Tafsir, they made ijtihad. And as I mentioned earlier, the door to ijtihad when it comes to the Qur'an will never be closed, because the Qur'an is the guide for mankind. Well, whenever anything comes up, that thing has to be viewed in the light of the Qur'an. For example, in this century we had new ideologies, and some of the Mufassirin who wrote in this century, they discussed those ideologies in their tafsirs, and they were correct in doing so, because that is part of the purpose of the Qur'an, to show us what is truth and falsehood. So for example, Marxism, existentialism, nationalism, Freemasonry, all of these things, if you have deep knowledge of the Qur'an, they are actually discussed and refuted in the Qur'an. And people like Sayyid Qutb in Tidlal al-Quran, Ad-Dosari in his Tafsir, Muhammad Rashid al-Rida, they discuss all these things, because that is part, again, that is part of the nature of the Qur'an, that in every generation, no matter what comes up, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us guidance to show us what is right and what is wrong. So therefore the application of tafsir, or of the ijtihad in tafsir, inshallah, it will always exist. But the problem with saying that ijtihad in tafsir is allowed, and in fact it is required, we can say. It is a part kifaya. The Muslim Ummah as a whole needs it. But when we say that it is allowed, the problem then arises that some people make tafsir when they are not qualified to make tafsir. So that brings us to the next question: is that if it is permissible to make ijtihad in tafsir, and tafsir bi-ra'i is permissible, the next question is, who is qualified to make that tafsir? What are the requirements for the mujtahid in tafsir? Well, this is discussed probably by all the people who wrote about tafsir, and what are the requirements for the people who make tafsir. Some of the requirements, of course, have to do with the with the person himself, that we cannot from the outside see whether or not he has met the requirements. For example, before entering into making tafsir, he should make sure that he has sound aqidah, that he understands Islam and he understands the beliefs of Islam before attempting to make tafsir. As I said, some of these you cannot tell from externally whether or not that they are being met. And he should be free when making tafsir. He should be free of any personal desires or any personal goals. His goal is simply to please Allah and find the truth in the meanings of the verses of the Qur'an. Third, and this one we can judge externally, we can see it. He must follow the correct methodology in tafsir. In other words, his tafsir, his understanding of the verses in the Qur'an, must be based on the sources of tafsir that we discussed so far and in the proper manner. For example, the Prophet ﷺ explaining a verse in the Qur'an will take preference to some meaning of that verse in the Qur'an that we get based simply on the Arabic language. So we must follow the correct methodology or minhaj when it comes to tafsir. And he also must be well grounded in the sciences or the disciplines that he will need to use in making tafsir. Disciplines, I knew that would throw you off. Science areas of study, and he has to be well grounded in the different sciences that he will need to use in making tafsir. And we'll discuss some of those sciences and some of their importance. They go from the letter A to the letter O. How many is there? 20? No. A to O? 20? Sorry, anyway. Because the others here I had 1, 2, 3, 4, so I had to start with A, B, C, D, F, G. The first one is ilm al-lugha, or the understanding of the lugha. Here in particular we mean the language, Arabic language, but what does lugha in particular mean? Linguistics? It also means having a good or firm grasp of the meanings of the words of the Arabic language. That he knows the meanings of the words of the Arabic language. And again, he should have some depth in this area. Should have some depth in this area because there's many words in Arabic that have more than one meaning. So if he only knows one or two of the meanings, the verse itself might actually mean something else, and he's sticking with his one or two meanings because he doesn't have the knowledge that he needs. For example, what's an example that we gave earlier in the room? No? أيوة. نظر. No. القرء could mean either the woman when she's on her period, or it could mean the woman during her time of purity. So if you only know one meaning of the word, you will stick with that meaning without knowing. What about qadr? What's the meaning of qadr? More than two actually. Destiny. Also fate. What do you mean? That's what he said.
I don't know destiny, I know fate.
What else?
كمية.
Also means power. What was the example that we gave earlier about the noon? أيوة. نعم. Okay. He thought that we would not, or that we could not. لن نقدر عليه. So what's the meaning of نقدر عليه in this verse? So I said that last time. Most of the translations, if you look in the translation, it will say that the Prophet Zanun thought that we had no power over him, because they are taking just that one meaning. This is probably due to this point, and they have most of the people who translated the Qur'an into English, they are not Arabs, so their understanding of Arabic maybe sometimes is it's limited. Just like my use of the English language. So they take this verse according to the meaning of qadr, or that they know, not thinking about the other forms that it could take, the other meanings that it could mean. As I said, we discussed that earlier. That's an example of having to know al-lugha in some detail in order to be able to understand completely the Quran. The second science that the Mufassir should be well familiar with is the Nahu, or grammar. Obviously the meaning of a sentence, or the meaning of a word in a sentence will change depending on the i'rab, or depending on what's its role in the sentence, whether it is a verb or object of a preposition and so forth. Well, probably the most famous example of that is what? That's a good example. Yeah. Didn't think of that one. That's a good example that he gave. But the one I was thinking about is from Surah Tawbah. أن الله بريء من المشركين ورسوله. If you read that wrong, or even if you just understand it wrong, what will it mean? طيب, instead of saying that Allah, if you're poor in English, in the Arabic grammar, Allah, if you misread this verse, instead of saying that Allah and His Messenger are innocent or have nothing to do with the mushrikeen, you'll read it that Allah is innocent of or has nothing to do with the mushrikeen and His Messenger. Right? So, just some small changes in the tashkil can greatly change the meaning of the verse, both this verse and also in the verse that Saad referred to. Yeah? That's changing the verse. That's نعم. طيب, also علم الصرف. What is علم الصرف? Where's Abu Saud when we need him? الجريد. طيب. نعم. هذا هو يذكر. When the meaning of a verse, of a word isn't clear, sometimes you can derive the meaning of the word by deriving where the word comes from. What's the source of the word? If you understand the source of the word, you can understand what the word means. Similarly, if you don't understand what the word comes from, you can have a wrong understanding of the verse. One example that was given by Zamakhshari is from Surah Al-Isra, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَوْمَ نَدْعُ كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. يَوْمَ نَدْعُ كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. So if some people, I don't know who, but he refers to some people saying that on the Day of Judgment, everyone will be called by their mother's name, with their mother, based on this verse. How do they get that? Or what's the response to that?
Imam, from
Now, the verse says that everyone will be called with their imams, or with their leader, or with whoever they follow. But they say it means by their mother. Imamihim, instead of meaning their leaders, they said it means their mothers. But the plural of can it be imam? Cannot. So this is an example where so and close to that, but slightly different also, is ilm al-ishtiqaq, which also deals with figuring out where the words are derived from. Well, this is also a very important area when it comes to making tafsir, because without it, again, you will be likely to make many mistakes in your tafsir. For example, the word al-Masih. Masih is derived from what word? It comes from what? Doesn't come from Masiyaha?
No.
What do you mean? Go to the books of tafsir. في اختلاف بين العلماء about whether it comes from Masiyaha or Masih. No, there's a slight difference between them. You should tell me what the difference is, not me. I thought I wrote down there's a slight difference between them. And if Saud comes, we'll ask him what's the difference between them. With respect to this one about the ishtiqaq, we had one example in this class. Well, that was just after we turned the tape off, maybe, related to this. You remember what the... Naam? Naam. You remember this example? What was it that I was saying? That if I said that nadara is used with إلى, it means what?
نظر.
It means looking. Okay, it cannot mean waiting. It means looking. Well, so someone asked about the verse in the Qur'an in which a shaitan says what to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? طيب. And literally without, it doesn't say ila, but it means to give me respite or to leave me for such time. طيب, what's the difference? Actually, there's no relation between the two questions, because the root of the two words are different. One has a 3-letter root and the other one has 4 letters. انتظر. لا انظر.
نظر وانتظر.
طيب, okay. Anyway, it's different from the other one, right? We agreed upon that. طيب. Also, what is needed for the mufassir is the 3 علوم البلاغة الثلاثة, which are what? What are those 3? البلاغة. لا, البلاغة is not one. It's the name for علوم البلاغة الثلاثة. Maybe you're giving a different word for the same thing.
كناية استعارة.
لا, المعاني والبيان والبديع. What's the meaning of the 3 of each one? If you don't know the meaning of you don't know what the 3 are, then you should consider yourself not qualified to make ijtihad in tafsir. As-Suyuti, after mentioning these 3, he said that these 3 sciences are from the most important prerequisites for the mufassir. المعنى is, and you know by this science you know the special characteristics of the words that give it its special meaning. And some letters, for example, in the Arabic language imply certain things, but when they're in the root of the word, they imply certain things. For example, if something ends in the letter ha, what does that imply? Usually, not always, but usually. If something ends in the letter ha, what does it imply? Usually. Maybe I'll let you think about that. طيب, البيان, the science of علم البيان, allows you to distinguish between different words on the basis of how clear to how obscure the word is. والبديع means what?
استعارة. تشبيه. All these things.
Gives you an understanding of the expressions of the speech. As I said, As-Suyuti said that these 3 sciences are from the most important prerequisites for the mufassir. علم القراءة, the knowledge of the different recitations of the Qur'an also is the necessity for the mufassir. Because in general, the meaning of the different recitations, they will not contradict other qira'at or other recitings. They may supplement each other, but they will not in general contradict each other. So if you're not familiar with the different readings or recitations of the Qur'an, you may come up with an interpretation which will contradict those other recitings, which would mean that your interpretation is incorrect. So we are on the letter I. So next time we'll continue from I. Finish I, J, K, L, M, N, O. Huh? I. I'll give them to you. A was علم اللغة. B was علم النحو. C was علم الصرف. D was علم الاشتقاق. و E, F, and G علوم البلاغة الثلاثة. و H علم القراءة. ايوه. Any question?
بعض العلماء القدامى يقولون لا يجوز التفسير بالرأي. العلماء القدامى يقولون لا يجوز التفسير بالرأي. لأنه يعني نفس الشيء اللي تكلمت على الله غير علم.
نعم.
ذكرت ثلاث أسباب كلها مردودة.
نعم.
يعني يعتبر قولهم مردود.
نعم.
ما يأخذ.
نعم. صح.
ليش تذكر؟
Because you will read it. When you read it, you should know what is the argument and why we didn't necessarily accept the argument. Actually, it depends on what do they mean by Rai. We cannot say that they're wrong completely. If they mean Rai or Ijtihad, the Ijtihad which has no basis, then they are correct. And the other one that says Tafseer by Rai is acceptable, if they mean any kind of Rai, they are also wrong. So as Uthman figured out, neither one is going to be exactly correct. It depends on what they mean exactly by those statements. طيب